How's it going, everyone? My name is George, and this is a video on what I think should happen or could likely happen in the next set of MCU Spider-Man movies, the college trilogy or next trilogy, if you want to call it that. Now, this doesn't mean it's gonna happen. Maybe some of these characters could be in it, maybe not. Maybe the storylines, maybe they won't. This is just some of the things that I think they could or should do, and how maybe certain characters should be handled if they appear. And this isn't going to cover big event films that Spider-Man can cross over, mostly the solo films, although I will explain maybe how maybe certain event films could potentially affect films in between. I'm not too sure yet, but it's most likely going to focus on Spider-Man's movies. And this is going to contain spoilers for Spider-Man No Way Home, so if you haven't seen No Way Home and you don't want to be spoiled, don't watch this video. If you don't mind spoilers or you've seen Spider-Man No Way Home, then feel free to stick around. So Spider-Man No Way Home ended in an interesting way. Everyone forgot who Peter Parker is. He has no one. His friends don't remember him. Aunt May is dead. And he's got to start over from scratch, basically. And it's put the franchise in this interesting position where now they can take him in a different direction, whether it be a darker direction, a more mature direction that moves away from the more high school John Hughes feel of the home trilogy. And it also gives them the opportunity to surround Peter Parker with new characters, create some new team ups. Who knows? So basically, what I think is going to happen, or what I think probably could happen, is in the fourth film, I think they're going to give Peter Parker a new set of characters to build around him. So, examples of these characters can be Gwen Stacy, Harry Osborn, Felicia Hardy, who is also known as the Black Cat, Miles Morales, and maybe some of the law enforcement allies that Spider-Man has had in the comics in various Spider-Man franchises, like Captain George Stacy, Yuri Watanabe, and Miles Morales' dad, Jefferson Davis. So basically, we see that Peter Parker has a GED book at the end of No Way Home, so it's likely he's going to study for that, and that's going to be his way to get into college, which I would assume would be something like Empire State. And I think that'd be a great way to like introduce Gwen Stacy and Harry Osborn, since in the comics that's basically where he met them, in college. And like the comics maybe have it where Harry and Gwen don't have a good relationship with Peter Parker at first. Maybe it's a little rocky at first because Peter Parker is hesitant to let new people into his life. It could be also because he remembers what happened to Gwen Stacy in Amazing Spider-Man's universe, as well as knowing that Harry Osborn is the son of Norman Osborn. And even though it's a different Norman Osborn, a Norman Osborn still killed Aunt May and basically ruined Peter's life. But maybe throughout the film, maybe he starts to get closer to them and starts developing new friendships with them and realizes that maybe he needs more people in his life. Another character that I threw in there, Felicia Hardy, is a character that I feel like is long overdue to be in a Spider-Man movie, especially her alter ego, Black Cat. With Spider-Man starting off fresh, that also includes the fact that MJ doesn't remember him. So Peter Parker will probably need a new love interest for at least a movie or two, depending on where they go with Peter Parker's love life, since his love life is never easy. And the interesting thing with Black Cat is, unlike Peter's other love interests in the previous movies and movie franchises, Black Cat loves the Spider Man personality more than the Peter Parker. And since nobody knows who Peter Parker is, you have this cat burglar and Black Cat that starts off as an enemy, that later becomes an ally, that clearly has it for Spider Man and is curious to see who's behind the mask. And maybe down the road she gets disappointed in who's behind the mask. But whatever, the mystery of Spider Man intrigues her. And Black Cat can also tie into another villain that I'm going to get to when we get to the villains. But that's a possible route you can go. You can also maybe go a similar route that Spider-Man the animated series went, where Felicia Hardy is actually a friend of Peter Parker's, and Yeah, she has feelings for Spider-Man, but she still cares for Peter Parker as a friend. And that's my favorite version of the character. So I think a version like that can work in a new trilogy, especially if they decide to give him a new supporting cast. They move away from the old supporting cast, and that includes no longer having MJ as Peter's love interest. Now, another character that I threw in there is Miles Morales. So, Miles has been hinted at in these films. His uncle Aaron, played by Donald Glover, was in Spider Man Homecoming, and Electro made the reference in No Way Home about, we need a black Spider Man, there's got to be a black Spider Man out there. And Miles is a character that even Tom Holland has hinted at, a character that could, down the road, take the mantle of Spider Man. And with Miles, I feel like there's got to be like a build up for Miles, because if, let's just say, he does take the mantle of Spider-Man, I feel like you got to build it up, but also take your time with it. So let's just say you introduce him in the fourth film. Don't have him get bit by the spider. Maybe wait until at least the fifth film, because you also kind of want Tom Holland's Spider-Man to grow up a little bit more. Maybe wait until he's at least 20, he's halfway done with college, before he decides to take one under his mantle, someone that he can train and mentor. And maybe by like the sixth film, maybe he's ready to pass the torch to Miles. Like, they really gotta find a way to build it up, and maybe you can have it where, Uncle Aaron is the Prowler, his Uncle Aaron's the Prowler, and maybe like he gets killed by a mob boss, and that's the motivation for Miles. Or similar to the PS4 game, his dad dies, and that's how Peter finds Miles, because you also want to build a relationship between Peter and Miles, not just a Spider-Man man mentoring a new Spider-Man relationship. Have it where Peter Parker wants to connect with this kid, whether it's before or after he gets the spider bite. So that's basically how I would handle Miles personally. Now, another character that I would like to see an MCU version of that might be a little controversial, because he already has his own set of movies in the Sonyverse, but I think if they do it this way, they can do it right. Is maybe introduce an MCU version of Eddie Brock that's not a journalist, not a photographer, but similar to his Spectacular Spider-Man, Ultimate Spider-Man counterparts, which is a guy that's very much into science, that is similar to Peter Parker in that his parents died when he was very young, and maybe have him be like the first person that Peter builds a connection with after the events of No Way Home, because they find so much in common, and they begin this friendship similar to Spectacular Spider-Man and Ultimate Spider-Man that becomes like a brotherhood of sorts. But as the franchise goes on, maybe like they start getting distant, and Eddie starts building resentment for certain things, but maybe have them go to Empire State together, maybe be roommates, become good friends, intern under someone like Dr. Miles Warren or Dr. Kirk Connors. I think if you go the more science route with Eddie Brock, it can work in the MCU. So the next question is, do we bring back characters from the home trilogy like Happy, Ned, and MJ? Yes and no. The no is, don't introduce them in the fourth movie. It's been established that Ned and MJ got accepted into MIT and will likely be there for the foreseeable future. And I'm assuming that the fourth film is going to be like covering at most year two of Peter's college, or maybe year one. It kind of depends on when the film comes out and the time difference that the film establishes. But they're not going to be there for quite a while. Use the fourth film to give Peter Parker a new set of characters to build around. Now, if, let's just say, you reintroduce these characters, does Peter Parker start new friendships with them? Does he try to get them to remember him like he promised? That's kind of up in the air. Because, really, with this whole memory loss thing that the world has gone through, I don't know if an event film could like undo it or like change certain things around. Like, what does Peter Parker do? Like, does Secret War happen between 4, 5, or 6? And maybe something happens that triggers people to start remembering? I don't know. And that's another thing. I don't want them to undo the spell right away. Like, if they ever choose to undo it, like, give it, like, put Peter Parker in a spot where nobody knows where he is for quite a while. Wait to reintroduce some of these characters in the fifth or sixth film, at least. Like, give Peter Parker the breathing room to feel like he's alone, but starts building new relationships. And if he feels comfortable in starting new friendships, let him start new friendships or start friendships all over again. Now, there is a couple ways to bring Ned and MJ back into the fold, and that kind of ties into how I would handle some of the villains. So, we'll get more into that when we get to the villain aspect of Spider-Man. As far as a character like Happy Hogan, I don't know if he's needed in this trilogy. Like, Ned and MJ are closer to Peter than Happy was, and I think Happy's gonna go back to the Iron Man world where when Armor Wars comes around on Disney Plus. So I feel like while it'd be nice for Peter and Happy to reunite again down the road, it's not necessary. So I want to really bring Happy into this trilogy. Now, as far as like potential allies go for Spider-Man, like certain crossovers, I did mention before, and I want to touch upon it before I forget. Maybe establish he has relationships, friendships with certain law enforcement officers, like Captain George Stacy and Yuri Watanabe. Maybe have Captain Stacy not be like his Amazing Spider-Man counterpart, and more so like the classic comics in Spectacular Spider-Man, where he 100% trusts Spider-Man. Have Yuri Watanabe be the detective that might be hesitant to trust Spider-Man, but starts to trust him over time. Like, give Spider-Man like a little bit of help and trust, while at the same time like have law enforcement also have their concerns about the web slinger, since he no longer has the backing of the Avengers or Stark Industries. Now, as far as crossing over with other heroes, I feel like characters like Daredevil and Kate Bishop would make more sense. Much more grounded heroes to cross over that can also connect to a certain villain. Daredevil can be the one character that finds out who Spider-Man is, and with his powers know that he is not lying about his past history, why nobody knows who he is. And maybe he can be, maybe not like a mentor, but a partner to help Spider-Man show him like what the vigilante life is like. And the character Kate Bishop, I feel like, can play an interesting dynamic with Spider-Man, where the two can like have their personalities would play off each other well. And like Daredevil, I feel like if they touch upon a certain villain that I'm gonna get into, it would make sense for Kate Bishop to maybe cross over into Spider-Man. So with the villains, I'm not gonna get through every single Spider-Man villain. Just some of these villains that I think could work. So one villain that I feel like is an absolute must is the Scorpion. This character has been set up since Spider-Man Homecoming, when Mark Gargan was thrown in jail and wanted to know Spider-Man's identity. And even though Peter Parker's been erased, Spider-Man was not erased. And so he's likely still wanting to get revenge on Spider-Man and still wants to know who he is. It's been many years if you include the 5-year period of the snap. And he still probably wants revenge on Spider-Man. Maybe he broke out of jail or something, because we don't really know what's been going on since Homecoming with that character. And maybe someone like J. Jonah Jameson or Wilson Fisk will fund and help create the Scorpion suit. Now, J. Jonah Jameson's a character you gotta keep around, and I assume he's still gonna be slandering Spider-Man. Maybe he uses Gargan and has him wear the Scorpion suit to capture Spider-Man. But then when Gargan realizes he can't take the suit off, he goes after JJ, but Spider-Man saves him, and maybe that gets JJ off his back. Another character that I know they've been wanting to do for some time, that they were planning on doing before the multiverse stuff came up in No Way Home, was Craven the Hunter. And I think Craven would be a great character for this next trilogy, especially if you do Craven's Last Hunt, one of the more darker Spider-Man story arcs. Now I know Sony's doing a Craven the Hunter film, so that might put the Craven thing in jeopardy, but I still think I still think Craven could work in the MCU done right. Now, an obvious villain that I've been hinting at is the Kingpin. Vincent D'Onofrio returned to play the Kingpin in Hawkeye, and he is once again brilliant. And I know people are going to say, well, wasn't he shot at the end of Hawkeye? But we didn't really see it on screen. So, to me, the Kingpin is still alive, and he is a villain that is also long overdue to have a live action encounter with Spider-Man. And since Daredevil and Kate Bishop have also encountered Spider-Man, they can be potential allies in a Spider-Man versus Kingpin film. Or maybe Kingpin can be like the main antagonist throughout this trilogy, because now that Spider-Man's going to be focusing more on New York, he's going to learn who the big man of crime really is, who might be potentially really running these streets. Like, is he paying off corrupt cops? Like, maybe that brings in characters like Captain Stacy and Yuri Watanabe to also help clean up the system. Just so many different things you can do with Kingpin, and maybe on the side introduce other crime lords like Hammerhead and Tombstone. And one of the things I think a Spider-Man movie should touch upon is a gang war. Like, I remember the gang wars from the 1980s comics, from some of the shows. One of my favorite arcs of the Spectacular Spider-Man cartoon was the gang war aspect of it. When Tombstone, Doc Ock, and Silvermane were going on their little gang war of sorts. And, Hammerhead, like betrayed everyone at one point. Just an awesome story arc, and I would love to see that on the big screen for the first time. Maybe with different characters. And if you go the crime lord aspect, one character that I think should be introduced is Mr. Negative Martin Lee. Feast was introduced in the MCU already. There's been hints of, and we know Aunt May was working there. And I have a feeling that Peter Parker on the side will probably want to still help volunteer at Feast. And maybe he gets to meet Mr. Negative's alter ego, Martin Lee, and maybe they establish a friendship. And when Peter finds out that Martin Lee is this crime lord, Mr. Negative, maybe he wants to help Martin Lee, and he's torn because this is someone that's become like a mentor to him after he's lost everything, but at the same time he's doing the wrong stuff. And since like No Way Home kind of takes inspiration from One More Day, why not like do Brand New Day done right? Now, I've never been a big fan of Brand New Day, but Marvel movies have done a pretty good job of taking controversial story arcs in the comics and making them translate better on the big screen. So maybe you can do like the Brand New Day story done right. And I know Mr. Negative was one of the main antagonists of Brand New Day, so that would be interesting to see. And I would like to see him be more so like his PS4 counterpart, like the Spider-Man PS4 game. Now, obviously, there's three more villains I want to get to before I end this video. This is a longer video than I anticipated. But before I get to the next villain, I do want to touch upon how this is maybe how you can also introduce Black Cat, where maybe someone like Kingpin, like in the comics and Spider-Man the animated series, maybe Black Cat is secretly working or being blackmailed, or maybe she's trying to stop him because like he was blackmailing her family or something. So that's a way you can also introduce Black Cat in as well as the character of Aaron Davis being the Prowler. Maybe the Kingpin is Pin or Mr. Negative or some other crime lord are paying the Prowler, and that's how Aaron Davis could possibly get killed off, and maybe that's a motivation for Miles Morales down the road. There's so many different things you can do with these characters and how they affect other characters in this next trilogy. But yeah, I would love to see Vincent D'Onofrio and Tom Holland go at it as Kingpin and Spider-Man. Like, that's the one crossover we desperately need in the MCU. So, the next villain is the Hobgoblin. And yes, you can introduce the Hobgoblin before or without introducing an MCU version of the Green Goblin. Because I know people will say, well, we already got the Green Goblin, but that's from the Raimi verse. So the MCU doesn't have an official Green Goblin as of yet, if it ever does. So Goblin was also involved in some of these gang wars in the 1980s. He's a goblin that's more interested in crime than personally destroying Spider-Man's life like the Green Goblin is. So the Hobgoblin could maybe take inspiration from the goblin figure or guy in the hood that was riding a glider at the Battle of the Statue of Liberty and make his own serum and become the Hobgoblin. This is one of the ways you can bring Ned and MJ back into the fold. In the comics, Ned Leeds is one of the many people who was caught wearing the Hobgoblin costume that was brainwashed, essentially. So maybe have it where Spider-Man gets back into their lives because Ned is one of the people framed by the Hobgoblin. And he does this without even knowing who Spider-Man is, who Spider-Man was once close to or is close to. Dude, the Hobgoblin doesn't care who gets framed or hurt down the road. So I think this would be a great way to bring those characters back in. Maybe have it where the Hobgoblin is getting them involved again by framing his best friend. And another thing is with the Hobgoblin is the Spider-Man animated series showed that you can introduce Hobgoblin before introducing the Green Goblin. Remember, the Hobgoblin appeared before the Green Goblin Spider-Man the animated series. And he's another character that's long overdue to be in a film. And I think the mystery of who the Hobgoblin's identity is, which had been one of the more interesting things in the Spider-Man comics because it went on for so many years, it stopped and then it came back. It would be interesting to touch upon that in a film. And if you go the gang war direction where Hobgoblin's competing against people like Hammerhead, Tombstone, Kingpin, and Mr. Negative on who will be the big man of crime who's going to run the city. The Hobgoblin with all his gadgets, with his super serum or whatever he would take to become this new powerful villain, would add a lot of intrigue to this war. So the next two villains that I'm going to touch upon have already been in previous Spider-Man movies, but I think like at somewhere down the road they might be addressed. So the first one was already hinted at in a mid-credits scene of No Way Home. Venom. We saw that Tom Hardy's Eddie Brock left a part of the symbiote when he went back to his universe. And since before they went back to their universe, they wanted to go to New York to find Spider-Man, it's likely the symbiote's going to go to New York and find Spider-Man. So, with Spider-Man being in a position where he's all alone, there's a lot of hurt, sadness, and maybe anger at how things are going for him after the events in No Way Home, it's an easy way for the symbiote to start manipulating him, to start controlling him, to take advantage of some of those mixed emotions. And I know people say, well, what about Secret Wars? Because we know in Secret Wars, he got the symbiote in there. Well, maybe he can get it before Secret Wars. Like, that would be something interesting to see. Maybe he goes into Secret Wars with the symbiote. You don't even need to have it where he only wears the symbiote for one film. Maybe it can be like a 2-film arc. Who knows? And this is where characters like Harry Osborn and Eddie Brock can come into the fray. And basically, I think what I would do is kind of similar for both. So with Eddie Brock, it would be similar to Ultimate and Spectacular Spider-Man, where maybe something happens between Peter and Eddie where he starts resenting Peter Parker, and something happens where he starts resenting Spider-Man, and the symbiote takes full-on advantage of that when Peter removes it. And kind of like his Spectacular Spider-Man counterpart, he goes on to try to find people close to Peter Parker, new and old. This is another way to bring back Ned, MJ, and even Happy, because the symbiote could provide Eddie Brock with memories pre the spell that made everyone forget who Peter Parker is. And that's where Spider-Man has to go in and maybe reconnect with them and save them. them, as well as fighting against one of his new best friends. It's the same thing with Harry Osborn as well. Well, while Peter and Harry are the best of friends, although they aren't just yet, but maybe they are at some point in this new trilogy, they have a fallout, as well as Harry resenting Spider-Man at a certain point. And like with Eddie Brock, the symbiote can give Harry memories of Peter Parker before No Way Home and after No Way Home. And a similar situation comes into play. Now, a lot of people are going to say Harry Osborn as Venom. Well, that's if like they don't want to cause confusion, since we already got an Eddie Brock Venom in the Sonyverse. And Harry's been Venom in the Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon. And while it's not confirmed, I have a feeling in the upcoming PS5 Spider-Man game that's a sequel to the PS4 game, I have a feeling Harry Osborn's going to be Venom. I'm not saying that's 100% certain, but with basically all the hints that the Spider-Man PS4 games have been giving and hinting at where the symbiote's going to go, where Harry Osborn is going to go, it seems likely that something could happen where maybe Harry Osborn can be the Venom of the MCU. As long as it's not Mark Gargan, I'd rather Mark Gargan be Scorpion. I've never been a big fan of Mark Gargan being Venom. Just never sat right for me. And then the last villain, and this is a villain that I feel like if you do him, save him for the sixth film, and it would make more sense if, let's say, maybe something happens to Harry, maybe Harry becomes Venom, and after the symbiote's removed, Harry either dies, or he becomes sick, or like severely scarred, or something happens to him. The Green Goblin, at a certain point, an MCU version that's in Tom Holland's own universe, will probably eventually appear. We already know that the Green Goblin, Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin from the Raimi-verse, has already left a huge impact on Spider-Man. And Peter's probably going to want to keep tabs on Norman Osborn throughout this trilogy if he ever meets Norman Osborn. And in this scenario, if let's just say something happens to Harry and Spider-Man's involved, Norman will want revenge on Spider-Man, kind of similar to how Spider-Man wanted revenge on the Raimi Norman for killing Aunt May. So that would push MCU Norman to become the Green Goblin. I think that would be a better way. And maybe Norman's also a shadow villain throughout this trilogy. Maybe he's helping fund villains like the Scorpion, paying off characters like Craven to go after Spider-Man. Maybe he can be a shadow villain as well, and maybe he's having his own power struggle against Wilson Fisk to control the city. And like some people will love Ultimate Green Goblin, or some people may not care for Ultimate Green Goblin, but I feel like if you do Green Goblin in the MCU, I think it would be fine if you go the Ultimate Goblin route, where he's more of a monster-like villain than wearing the classic costume. We already saw this version of Spider-Man go up against that in No Way Home. I think give like a Green Goblin that would actually really give into anger towards Spider-Man. That would give Spider-Man an even harder time than what Dafoe's Green Goblin did. And I'm not saying go the route of the death of Spider-Man, because we know in the Ultimate Comics, it was Ultimate Green Goblin that killed Peter Parker, which led to Miles becoming Spider-Man down the road. I'm not saying you have to do that, but like give Spider-Man like his toughest battle ever, where he's going to want to destroy aspects of Spider-Man's life, find out who Spider-Man is. So, those are just some of the ideas that I would float around with, that I would like to see in the next trilogy of Spider-Man movies. There's so many characters you can introduce that have not been introduced in a Spider-Man film, not just in the MCU, but in a Spider-Man film. There's characters that you can reintroduce. There's different story arcs you can go. And again, I feel like a lot of this will also depend on what crossover film Spider-Man is in between. Like, having Infinity War and Endgame in between Homecoming and Far From Home did have an effect on Spider-Man when it came to being in Far From Home. So, again, we don't know like what secret wars take place in between Tom Holland's fourth and fifth Spider-Man movie. Would, like, maybe, let's say, Spider-Man appearing with, let's say, the Fantastic Four appear in between 4 and 5? We don't really know, because ultimately those crossover films could also help influence decisions that Spider-Man makes, or what actions are influenced. And that can also be maybe what happens with, people knowing who he is. And speaking of that, I feel like there should only be certain heroes that should know who Spider-Man is. Daredevil's one of them. The Fantastic Four as well. And that's another thing. There are other characters that I would like to see Spider-Man cross over with, whether it's in his films or in their films. They haven't even been introduced yet, like the Fantastic Four and X-Men. So it's kind of really hard to see where Spider-Man can go in other MCU movies and what new relationships he can build with other heroes. I can only really throw in Daredevil as a big one, as well as maybe Kate Bishop as a second one. But yeah, those are my thoughts on what I would like to see in the next Spider-Man trilogy. What ideas that maybe Marvel can take. They don't have to listen to me. They know what they're doing, because they took No Way Home, which seemed like an impossible thing to do, and made it a phenomenal movie. So I'm looking forward to seeing what they're doing regardless. I think whether it's the MCU, the animated Spider-Man Spider-Verse films, the PlayStation games, as well as, the rumors of Andrew Garfield getting his own movie, which I'll make a separate video on. Andrew Garfield, getting more projects. The future of Spider-Man is very bright, and this is just one character I can't get burnt out from. Like, I never need a Spider-Man break. So, what are your thoughts on what should be in the next set of Spider-Man movies? Comment below and let me know. And I want to thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe already if you haven't. Please share this with someone that loves Spider-Man, that's looking forward to the next Tom Holland trilogy. And I hope to see you guys real soon. Take care, everyone.